from shattered stone and broken throne.
Imagine this. The world stood still, not in silence, but in echoes. Echoes of broken marble and forgotten crowns. Stone pillars, once kissed by emperors' footsteps, now lean like tired bones under moss. Wind brushes through abandoned libraries where knowledge sleeps beneath dust, and forgotten alphabets fade like prayers in the dark. The giants had fallen. Rome, fractured. Han, quiet. Gupta, gone. Across continents, the lights of the classical world flickered and died. But in the spaces between the ruins, something stirred. Not silence, not death, but murmurings. A barefoot monk scribbling in candlelight. A call to prayer rising over a new desert city. A forge lighting up in the cold of the steppe. Here, in this darkened age, new empires were not born from conquest, but from the embers of collapse. What happens after an ending? Not always peace. Sometimes the pieces rearrange, and from those fragments, history doesn't sleep. It shifts. This is not a tale of darkness. This is the story of resilience, of reinvention, of the empires that dared to rebuild after the world broke. Welcome to the medieval world. When empires fall, they don't just disappear. They echo. Their stones crumble, yes, but their ideas drift through time like wind through a broken temple. Rome had fallen in the west. Han China had fractured. Gupta India, its golden light fading. These weren't just names on old maps. They were giants, and the earth shook when they collapsed. But history never pauses. In the shadows of ruins, a different world was stirring. Before we go into that history buried under sand, ash, and silence, stories that were never meant to survive, subscribe to Unique History Alive. Because here, the dead don't just whisper, they scream their truth. On this channel, we don't just tell you what happened. We show you why it mattered, who hid the truth, and what the world lost when history was rewritten. From blood-stained temples to banned scrolls, from warrior queens whose names were burned from memory, to emperors erased by their enemies. We breathe life into the past, one uncovered secret at a time.
Many call it the Dark Ages. But that label hides the truth. It wasn't just decay, it was change. It wasn't just collapse, it was transformation. From broken cities and scattered tribes, new voices began to rise. In dusty deserts, a prophet would rise and speak words that would ripple across continents. In distant lands, forgotten dynasties would reunify under banners not of the old, but of something stronger, something new. And across Europe, though kings were fewer and wars frequent, the church grew louder, its influence stronger than any crown. The cross became more than just a symbol. It became law. It became power. In the East, China, scarred but unbroken, would rise again. With it came invention, poetry, printing, gunpowder, the silent engines of a new age. This wasn't just a patchwork world trying to survive. This was the soil from which the medieval world would grow. A world of contradiction, faith and fire, gold and blood, learning and loss. So where do we begin? Not with a single empire. Not with one people or one king. We begin with a question: how did the broken world of late antiquity give birth to the forces that now shape our modern lives? This is not a timeline. It's not a classroom lecture. It's a journey. Through deserts and palaces, across mountains and oceans, into forgotten libraries and brutal battlefields. It is a journey into a world where religion ruled more than armies, where books were more powerful than swords, and where the future was not just dreamed, but carved into stone, law, and memory. From the golden domes of Byzantium to the scrolls of Baghdad. From Mongol riders sweeping across plains to traders in Timbuktu. From the cathedrals of France to the walls of ancient China. Each step forward takes us deeper into a time that refuses to be forgotten. This is the medieval world, where everything had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Where gods, kings, warriors, and dreamers rose from ruins to forge a world no one expected. And yet, one that shaped everything we know today. When the world cracked apart, it didn't vanish. It scattered. The old powers, Rome, Han, Gupta, were gone. But the pieces remained. And from those scattered fragments, something unexpected began to grow. Not one empire, but many. Not one voice, but a chorus. A new world was being born, not in peace, but in movement. Not from order, but from chaos. Rome had ruled the West. Now, it was only memory. Its statues toppled. Its legions gone. Its citizens no longer Romans, but Franks, Saxons, Visigoths, names that once whispered at the edges of maps now ruled the lands. But in the east, one spark survived. The Byzantine Empire, what was once Rome's eastern half, didn't fall. It endured. It changed its language. It changed its gods. But it held on. Its walls stood firm, its gold still glittered, and its capital, Constantinople, remained the beating heart of something old, reshaped into something new. Further east, China, though fractured after the Han, never truly disappeared. For centuries, it was divided by warlords and regional kings. But then, with the rise of the Sui and Tang dynasties, it was unified once more. And when it rose, it didn't just recover, it soared. It built new roads. It created new systems of government. It opened its gates to distant lands. Even beyond the empires of Eurasia, in places untouched by Roman roads or Chinese scrolls, something else was happening. In Africa, in Mesoamerica, in the Andes, people were building kingdoms, raising monuments, and creating knowledge in their own ways. The medieval world wasn't just about Europe and Asia. It was wider, deeper, and far more connected than it first seems. When old gods fall, people don't stop believing. They seek new answers. In the ruins of Rome, the cross took root. Christianity, once persecuted, now filled the void left behind. Not just spiritually, but politically. The church became a kingmaker. Bishops had more power than barons. Monasteries became centers of knowledge. While kings fought for land, the church fought for souls, and sometimes, both. In the East, the Orthodox tradition grew under the shadow of Byzantium, building mosaics, writing theology, and creating a distinct vision of faith. But while Christianity was solidifying in the West and East, something else exploded into history. From the sands of Arabia, a man named Muhammad preached a message of unity, justice, and faith. In less than a century, Islam had swept across continents. Arab warriors and scholars carried the word from the borders of China to the gates of Spain. And unlike the fractured kingdoms of Europe, the caliphate rose fast, organized, powerful, and connected by faith, law, and trade. But Islam wasn't just about conquest. It brought with it libraries, architecture, philosophy, and medicine. In many ways, it became the intellectual center of the world. From these new belief systems, Christianity and Islam emerged not just religions, but civilizations. History doesn't just move with armies. It moves with people. As empires fell, tribes moved. Peoples migrated. borders shifted like sand in the wind. In Europe, Germanic tribes became rulers of former Roman lands. They formed new kingdoms, blended languages, and forged new identities. In Africa, the Bantu migration spread ironwork, agriculture, and language across half a continent. In Central Asia, Turkic and Mongolic groups moved across the steppes, pushing into Persia, India, and beyond. These were not simple invasions, they were transformations. They brought war, yes, but also trade, intermarriage, and the fusion of cultures. As people moved, so did ideas. And as ideas moved, they changed the world. Technology was not asleep. In China, the stirrup transformed cavalry warfare. The heavy plough in northern Europe allowed farmers to break the thick soil, feeding more people, growing towns. In the Islamic world, scholars began translating ancient texts, Greek, Persian, Indian, and then expanding them. These weren't scattered lights. They were flares, signals that the world was waking up again. And perhaps most important of all, new trade routes emerged. The Silk Roads were alive once more, connecting Asia with the Mediterranean. The Indian Ocean became a highway for spices, gold, and sailors. The trans-Saharan trade brought salt and gold across Africa, linking great desert cities with the coastlines. Trade did what war could not, it united. A man in Baghdad could wear silk from China, read Greek philosophy, and sip coffee from East Africa. A scholar in France might write about Aristotle, thanks to an Arabic translation copied in Spain. The post-classical world had begun. It was a world built on broken empires, but it was held together by belief, movement, learning, and exchange. The seeds were planted, and soon the empires would rise. Empires are not built in silence. They rise with thunder. Beneath every great banner, there's blood. Behind every border drawn, there's a battlefield. The medieval world wasn't just written in ink. It was carved by swords, by fire, by siege towers crashing into walls. To survive in this world meant to fight. To expand meant to conquer. And to rule meant to hold on, even as everything tried to tear you apart. It started in the desert. Swift, decisive, unstoppable. In less than a century, Islam's early followers had built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. At Yarmouk, they broke the might of Byzantium. At Al-Qadisiyah, they shattered the Persian heartland. These weren't just victories. They were transformations. They brought a new faith, a new law, a new language, and a new way of seeing the world. From Spain to India, the crescent rose. And with it came cities of learning, systems of law, and a golden age lit by the sword's shadow. At the heart of it all was strategy, unity, and men like Khalid ibn al-Walid, the sword of God, whose tactics became legend. But not all fell. Constantinople stood. Twice under siege by Arab forces. Twice it held firm. The secret? A weapon that looked like magic, Greek fire. A burning liquid hurled at ships that couldn't be extinguished by water. The Byzantines didn't just survive, they adapted. In a world collapsing, they remained one of the few who knew how to hold the line. They became guardians of Rome's legacy, Orthodox Christianity, and a state that balanced diplomacy and violence with deadly precision. In the West, new powers grew from fractured soil. At the Battle of Tours, the Frankish leader Charles Martel stood against advancing Islamic forces. It was a brutal, decisive stand, and it stopped the Caliphate's northern push into Europe. Out of this defense rose something greater. Charlemagne, his grandson, carved out an empire from the rubble, uniting much of Western Europe under a Christian crown. He wasn't just a warrior. He crowned himself Emperor of the Romans. It was a statement the West would not just survive, it would dream of empire again. In the East, Tang China proved that might wasn't just in conquest, it was in preservation. They pushed deep into Central Asia, fought wars in Vietnam, defended their borders from Tibetan and Turkic invasions, and extended their influence through diplomacy and power. They built sections of the Great Wall, not as decoration, but as warning. China's army wasn't just vast. It was efficient, strategic, and built around a professional bureaucracy that made war an art and peace a plan. In Europe, the cross had grown powerful. But the Holy Land was not in Christian hands. The First Crusade marched not just with knights, but with a fever, one of faith, gold, and promise. And they won. They took Jerusalem, bathing it in both prayer and blood. But victories invite vengeance. Saladin, the Muslim general and unifier, struck back. At the Battle of Hattin, he broke the Crusader states and reclaimed Jerusalem. The Crusades weren't just religious wars. They were cultural earthquakes, colliding East and West in ways that would echo for centuries. They opened up trade routes, sparked learning, but also sowed hatred. One battle changed everything. 1066. The Battle of Hastings. William of Normandy crossed the English Channel and met Harold's army on English soil. By the end of the day, Harold was dead. And England would never be the same. New kings, new laws, new language. Norman rule reshaped the very DNA of England, connecting it deeply to continental Europe. Sometimes an empire doesn't expand outward, it invades inward, and transforms from within. But no power shook the world like the Mongols. They came like thunder. Silent one day, everywhere the next. From the plains of Central Asia, the armies of Genghis Khan and his sons swept across Eurasia with unmatched speed and brutality. At the Battle of Khalkha River, they crushed Russian princes. At the Siege of Baghdad, they destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate, burning its libraries, slaughtering its people. No city seemed safe. No army could stop them. But the Mongols didn't just burn, they built. Their empire became a road across the world. Trade flowed. Cultures mixed. A Pax Mongolica followed the storm. The cost was enormous. But in its wake, the world became more connected than ever before. The medieval world was shaped not just by beliefs, ideas, or trade, but by war. Every empire bled. Every empire fought for its right to exist. Victory wasn't always moral. But it was always transformative. And the map of the world, our world, was drawn with the ink of these battles. After war comes glory. Not always peace, but moments when empires shine brightest. When their cities pulse with music and learning. When science, poetry, and law flourish beside throne rooms and minarets. When the sword is sheathed, and the pen takes over. This was the peak. The time when the post-classical empires weren't just surviving. They were thriving, pushing the limits of human achievement. This was their golden age. In Baghdad, the streets hummed with merchants, scholars, and poets. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a library, it was a forge. A forge for ideas, where Greek philosophy met Indian mathematics and Persian medicine. Algebra was born here. The stars were charted with precision. Books were copied in Arabic, read across 3 continents, and debated in public forums. In Cordoba, light shone through mosque arches and university courtyards. Europe was in darkness, but in Muslim Spain, lamps stayed lit long after sunset. Knowledge was not just preserved. It was expanded. And in a world divided by empires, these centers became bridges. Connecting east to west, past to future. In the east, China stood at the height of brilliance. The Tang brought poetry, lines that still echo today. The Song brought technology, tools that would change the world. Printing, gunpowder, the magnetic compass. These weren't just inventions. They were revolutions, centuries ahead of their time. Cities like Kaifeng and Hangzhou buzzed with life, merchants, artisans, poets, engineers. Paper money flowed through hands. Rice fields fed millions. Bureaucrats took exams that tested more than memory. They tested virtue, philosophy, and judgment. It wasn't just the emperor who ruled. It was the system. And through that system, China thrived. In Constantinople, you could still feel the shadow of Rome. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just a church, it was a statement of power, of beauty, of divine rule. Byzantium was a bridge between East and West, Christian and Muslim, ancient and modern. Its laws, Justinian's Code, shaped courts for centuries. Its art, golden mosaics, religious icons, became the soul of Eastern Orthodoxy. And even as enemies pressed at its gates, Byzantium exported more than silk and grain. It exported civilization. To the Slavs, to the Balkans, to Russia, it offered alphabets, religion, and vision. In the West, something slower was taking shape. The chaos of early medieval Europe began to calm. Fields became farms. Castles became centers. Kings became more than warlords, they became rulers of nations. Feudalism, for all its chains, brought order. And with order came growth. Cathedrals rose like mountains, stone prayers reaching for heaven. Universities opened in Paris, Oxford, Bologna, places where monks and nobles alike wrestled with faith and reason. A new kind of identity was forming. Not just Christian. Not just peasant or noble. But French, English, Castilian, the seeds of the modern world. After destruction came connection. The Mongols had torn through cities like a storm. But when the dust settled, they did something no one expected. They protected the roads. Across the steppes, across deserts and mountains, it became possible to travel from Beijing to Baghdad in a matter of weeks. Traders, diplomats, monks, and scientists moved under the watch of Mongol patrols. Silk flowed west. Glass flowed east. Ideas and diseases traveled faster than ever before. This was the Pax Mongolica, a fragile peace held by fear, but filled with opportunity. And while Genghis had united the land with force, his grandsons united it with trade. Far to the south and west, great kingdoms rose beyond the notice of most maps. In West Africa, the Mali Empire controlled gold mines so vast, they could tip global economies. When Mansa Musa, its most famous king, journeyed to Mecca, he brought so much gold with him that he caused inflation in the cities he passed. But Mali wasn't just about wealth. It was about knowledge. In Timbuktu, libraries blossomed. Scholars debated theology and astronomy. The desert became a highway of camels and books. Along the East African coast, cities like Kilwa and Mombasa grew rich from Indian Ocean trade, blending African, Arab, and Persian cultures into something beautifully unique. This was not just a high point in wealth or architecture. It was the moment when the world was more connected, more creative, and more alive than anyone in the crumbling ruins of Rome could have imagined. A scholar in Baghdad could read Aristotle, Plato, and Pythagoras. A merchant in Venice could sell spices from India. A monk in China could chart the stars with tools that wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. The Golden Ages weren't the same everywhere. But in every empire, there was a fire. And for a time, it burned brightly. History doesn't stay buried. It lingers, etched into our streets, our laws, our stories, and even our language. We may live in the modern world, but we walk on foundations poured in the medieval one. The post-classical empires didn't just rise and fall. They shaped how we think, how we worship, how we fight, and how we dream. Their legacy is not ancient dust. It is breath. It is blood. It is now. The idea of the nation-state, one flag, one people, one law, was not born overnight. It began when medieval kings in places like France and England clawed power back from feudal lords, unifying lands under centralized crowns. From those monarchies, modern borders started to form. From their struggles with nobles, parliaments emerged. In Byzantium, law was more than a tool, it was a system. Justinian's code, refined and preserved, became the skeleton for European civil law centuries later. Meanwhile, the Islamic world developed legal traditions rooted in Sharia, blending spiritual law with administrative rule, creating governance that stretched from Morocco to India. These were not temporary systems. They became blueprints for the world we live in. Modern banking didn't appear in skyscrapers. It began in medieval souks and Tang money halls. The concept of credit, paper money, checks, and international banking all took root in these empires. In China, the Song dynasty introduced government-backed paper currency, a revolutionary concept. In the Islamic world, merchants used letters of credit and detailed bookkeeping that would inspire later European banking models. And the trade routes, Silk Road, Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan, became the arteries of global exchange. The modern economy? It was born on camel caravans and wooden ships. The rise of cities wasn't just about buildings. It was about people gathering, working, and sharing ideas. Baghdad, Hangzhou, Constantinople, Timbuktu, Fez, these were the stars of their age. Urban, multicultural, literate, and buzzing with life. Their energy didn't end with them. It moved forward into Paris, London, Cairo, Delhi, and beyond. The city is not a modern invention. It's a medieval rhythm still playing. During the chaos of collapse, many things were lost. But not everything. Monks in Europe copied texts with frozen fingers. Islamic scholars translated Plato and Galen, then debated them under desert stars. Chinese historians recorded dynasties with clarity that still astonishes. From these efforts, the ancient world lived on, through crisis, through war, through the dark. Later, when the European Renaissance bloomed, it did so on paper that had passed through Baghdad, Cordoba, and Constantinople. We didn't just inherit knowledge. We inherited the will to protect it. Gothic cathedrals still rise like stone prayers. Their pointed arches and stained glass still inspire awe. But so too do the domes of Damascus, the minarets of Samarkand, and the pagodas of Lebanon. Islamic art, intricate, geometric, endlessly detailed, echoes in tilework across continents. Byzantine mosaics, glowing, paper and printing, Chinese inventions, eventually sparked revolutions of thought across Europe. Crop rotation, irrigation, horse harnessing. These innovations fed millions and laid the groundwork for the industrial age. Our modern tools have medieval ancestors. Their genius is still alive in every device we touch. 3 of the world's major religions, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, deepened their roots in this age. Cathedrals and mosques were more than places of worship. They were seats of power, centers of law, schools, treasuries, and symbols. Debates between Islamic philosophers and Christian scholastics shaped the way people understood the divine. Meanwhile, Neo-Confucianism in China helped structure education, government, and ethics for generations. Our values about justice, honor, virtue, and truth were sharpened during this time. Before the medieval age, most people spoke tribal or regional tongues. But by its end, whole peoples began to speak with one voice. French, English, Arabic, Russian, Swahili, Mandarin. These weren't just languages. They were cultural identities, born in courts, markets, and battlegrounds. Ethnic and national groups began to form identities that still endure today, some bound by common ancestors, others by shared faith or purpose. The medieval world drew the first lines between us and them. And many of those lines still remain. The roots of East versus West, of Christendom versus Islam, of empire versus independence, they go back to this time. The Crusades may be over, but their memory still fuels tension. The Mongol invasions may be gone, but the cultural scars and pathways they opened still matter. Even colonialism, which would later redraw the globe, was made possible by the navigational tools and trade ambition seeded in this period. Our current world, its conflicts, alliances, and ambitions rests on medieval shoulders. We often think of the medieval as backward, primitive, dark. But the truth is, the light never really went out. It changed hands. It changed forms. And in the flicker of candlelight, in the clash of ideas, in the footsteps of pilgrims and warriors, our future was quietly being written. Not in isolation, but through struggle, through connection, through reinvention. The medieval world didn't end. It evolved. And we are living in its echoes. We began in the ruins. Among crumbled marble, silent temples, and the ghosts of fallen giants. We followed the sparks. New faiths, new empires, and new identities rising from the ashes. We crossed deserts and seas, watched swords clash and scrolls open. Listened to the footsteps of merchants, monks, and kings. We saw gold melt into books. We saw cities rise where wilderness once ruled. We watched old orders die and new dreams take their place. The medieval world was never a void. It was a forge. It took the wreckage of the classical past and reforged it into caliphates and cathedrals, dynasties and republics, temples and towers. From the fall of Rome to the courts of Charlemagne. From the collapse of Han China to the brilliance of the Tang and Song. From the nomadic raids of the Mongols to the intellectual heights of Baghdad and Timbuktu. It was not a pause in time. It was a rebirth. An age of struggle, but also of survival. An age of destruction, but also of discovery. The medieval world was never small. It stretched from Kyoto to Seville, from the steppes of Mongolia to the forests of Scandinavia. It was diverse beyond measure, linguistically, religiously, culturally. And yet, it was connected. Trade routes became arteries. Ideas became bridges. Conflicts became crossroads where worlds collided and were forever changed. This wasn't just East or West. It was a world humming with contact and contradiction. A Muslim scientist read Aristotle in Baghdad. A Chinese merchant traded with a Persian sailor. A Christian monk in Ireland copied ancient texts saved in Muslim Spain. The world was never isolated. It was tangled together, in blood, in brilliance, in belief. So much of what we call modern is medieval in disguise. Our universities? Born in cathedral schools and madrasas. Our banking systems? Forged in the hands of Muslim merchants and song officials. Our literature, our languages, even our maps, all written by hands that lived in this world we call the medieval. The foundations of modern law, diplomacy, science, and faith were poured during this time. Even the very idea of identity, of who belongs, who leads, who remembers, was shaped here. And what of our divisions? Many of our deepest conflicts between nations, religions, ideologies have roots buried in this age. The Crusades weren't just battles, they were wounds that still throb. The schisms, the exiles, the wars of faith, they carved scars into maps and minds. But so too did this world give us resilience. The idea that culture could survive conquest. That knowledge could outlive fire. That faith could build, not just destroy. It is in understanding this era that we begin to understand our present. We often look back on the medieval world with pity or arrogance. We call it dark. We call it backward. We tell ourselves we are better, wiser, freer. But perhaps we are simply standing on the shoulders of a world that dared to rebuild. A world that refused to be broken. A world that burned with both terror and wonder. In it, you can find the worst of human nature, crusades, plagues, conquest. But you also find its best, innovation, poetry, faith, and survival. It was a time that dreamed in domes and cathedrals, that wrote in languages still living, that reached for something greater in a world half-shadowed, half-lit. From the ashes of giants, to the splendor of empires, and into the very fabric of our modern world. The medieval world was not a pause in history, but the vibrant crucible where our future was forged.
What you just watched wasn't just history. It was a voice that refused to be forgotten. And there are so many more waiting to be heard. So if you felt something today, if the past reached out and touched you, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to Unique History Alive and walk with us, one buried truth at a time. Because history isn't dead. It's just been waiting for someone like you.